Yes, thanks a lot. So that you can say, I understand now why perhaps the speaker is doing things like this or like that, or I think this is actually something that he does well and that not, or she does well and not. So these are the things that I hope come out at the end of lecture 3 in this little series by end of April. What I will do today, and I share my screen with you if that's fine. Hope then there is always now the obligatory question, can you see my screen? Yes, people say yes. Okay, that's super. So what I will present today is a bit about what all of the effects that people have observed when they look into charismatic speech. My group and me also has done. We also have done some work, but we were by far not the only ones. Yet the topic of charisma, especially in, let's say, experimental systematic analysis, is relatively new. But why I'm here today, and why are basically you here today? I think these are questions we should also take a look at. And one of the reasons why this whole topic of public speaking and having an impactful way of presenting becomes more and more relevant is that actually more and more people do it. The podcast rate, for example, is increasing by about 20% each year. So basically more and more people have their own podcasts and also listen to podcasts, following other people talking, basically. The same applies to YouTube. And if we look into professional life, so basically professional life, even if you're not a media expert, does not spare you nowadays anymore from having every now and then social media presences. And this is also one of the reasons why I think that knowing a bit about what is it that basically that wins over listeners, that gets listeners' attention, and that make me myself a memorable person, that this is something that is definitely useful to know. And charisma itself has been defined for decades in always different ways. And there are many definitions in different languages. One of the oldest ones is actually that charisma is something like a magical gift given to a person, and that's it. So you have it or you do not have it, and if you do not have it, bad luck. And the picture behind this also, of course, at the same time says that charisma is something categorical. So it doesn't change. A person always has the same kind of charisma, and another person maybe not. And the new way of thinking about charisma is relatively new. It started in the 1970s in the US, mainly driven by psychology researchers. And then it became more and more popular in the 1980s. And only since about 20 years, or perhaps slightly more than that, we have definitions that look at charisma as a signal. So in the very first definition here, charisma is a values-based, symbolic, and emotion-laden leader signaling. The key term is actually signaling. So thinking about charisma as a complex bundle of signals that I convey and that you receive and that does something with you is actually relatively new. And this, of course, opens a whole lot of possibilities about measuring and analyzing, quantifying, and testing things. And perhaps just about this very first definition, values-based basically means that charismatic effects can only work if we have same goals or same values, same things that make us go on. If you have ever had something like a telemarketing call and people told you, hey, Mr. Niebuhr, don't you also want to save some tax money? And then you say, yes, I want. And then you have joint basis for, then you share the same goals, you have the same values, and then people can start with their charisma, trying to persuade you doing some things or buying some things and stuff. So the term values is actually very important. It's like two magnets. So if you do not share the same values, having a strong charismatic signal can actually push you out from each other and not get you together. Symbolic basically means, in a very traditional linguistic sense, that you use, for example, conventionalized arbitrary symbols that stand for something like a certain meaning. So basically, words are symbols. Most gestures are symbols. Prosodic patterns are symbols. Or at least most of them. These are the ways symbolic is defined. Of course, there are also, let's say, quite iconic gestures and things. But they are also more symbolic things. And emotion, I think, is clear. And what the term leader is about, has my colleague Jan Michalski has tried to define it a bit clearer. And what he came up with is that leader signaling basically means, or emotion-laden leader signaling basically means three things. So we can define charisma as an effect that stems from three different pillars. One of them is conveying trust, a second one conveying self-confidence, and a third one conveying passion. And these three things do things with the listeners, for instance, if we have in a speech scenario. Conveying competence creates trust. So basically, people think that what I'm saying is true, or what I'm saying can actually be achieved. So also in the feasibility of things, this is also belongs to trust. Then conveying self-confidence triggers motivation. So if I'm conveying that I can do things, you want to believe that you can do things too. So, and this triggers motivation, also getting committed to something. And finally, passion is the component that basically takes people at the arm and gets them somewhere. So the passion component is the one that in the end creates an action potential that makes people buy something or do something or just think something. So basically all of them need to somehow be coordinated to create charismatic effects. And now, what also Claudia said, what we are also mainly here for, why should you want that? We have seen that you need to talk a lot, even if you are not a linguist, you need to speak a lot in your professional life. And we have seen that there are different types of elements that you convey that make this effect, but why should you want to do it? Well, there are, as I said, systematic investigations of charismatic signals are relatively new. If we go very far back, we are perhaps in the late 1980s, early 1990s, at least in terms of a systematic approach to these kind of things, systematic experimental investigations. So you will hardly find any paper, and if you do, please send it to me, that is actually older than 30 years. So also my own research summary here is mostly on papers that are have been published in the years 2000 and something. And one of them is a book. It's called The Honest Signals. It's quite nicely written. So if you have nothing to read over Easter holidays, that would be a nice option. And what they have done, among other things in this book, is that they have equipped participants with a so-called EGG. I call this here a laryngeal microphone. And they have had 2 gyroscopes fixed to participants' wrists. So they have recorded people's vocal fold, vibration patterns, and people's gesturing, especially hand and arm gestures, over days. For many, many people, this is a huge, huge database. And they have used machine learning to try to map specific patterns onto milestones of people's professional everyday life. And what they came up with, indeed, is that they were able to, well, perhaps predict is too strong, but they were able to map with this approach, indeed, certain voice and gestural things onto, for example, whether or not investors had been convinced in business meetings, whether or not business cards had been exchanged at the end of business meetings, whether or not the customer acquisition went successfully, and as a side note in the book, whether or not the actual fake telephone numbers have been exchanged in a speed dating scenarios. So even if you want to basically Tinder, or basically what happens after Tinder, the way you are using your voice and you're using your gestures determines a lot about whether you are successful with your intentions or not. And we can go more into actual prosodic things. A study of Tickmeyer, just published last year, 2022, has looked into what I think is called in the US Shark Tank. So basically, people present their business ideas, and then there are people who might invest into the business ideas or not. And this is also done out of the TV setting in actual life. And what they did here is that they have looked over 5 years at the so-called TechCrunch startup fair that takes place in San Francisco every year. And they have analyzed 172, I think, or was it 175, yes, founders' speeches at these events, and basically mainly for prosodic patterns. So they have looked into pitch level, pitch range, pitchability, center of gravity, into speaking rate, pausing frequency, pause duration. What else is prosody? A lot more. I think it was about 12 to 15 different prosodic parameters, and only based on that, they were able to predict, again, correctly with a statistical modeling approach, with almost 80%, whether or not these startup pitches get funding from investors at the San Francisco Startup Fair, and with a bit of a lower probability, even how much money travels from the investors to the specific startup. So whether it's less than $100,000, more than $100,000, more than $500,000, or perhaps even more than $1 million. And compared to these prosodic things like gender, skin color, certain buzzwords, first person singular, and all this kind of stuff, also significantly contributed to the overall explanation performance, but much less than the kind of prosodic parameters did. And when I'm saying this to people, very often what I get is, yes, that might be true, but only in the US. Certainly, this will not happen in Europe. But the point is, yes, it does. I had a student at Cologne University the other year, and we have just replicated it as a master thesis project for the so-called Rhineland pitch, which is Germany's biggest startup competition. That takes place once a month, and during the COVID pandemic, so from June 2020 to 2021, all of these competitions took place online, and then we had very nicely speech quality data that we could basically extract, analyze. And the way this is basically the way the startup contest works is that the finalists are pitching, and then a jury of experts plus the entire YouTube audience votes for their favorites, and then they are put into ranking order from the first to the 5th place. And as you can see down here, this is the results of a linear discriminant analysis with the correspondence between the original ranking and the predicted ranking. only based on prosodic cues. And as you can see, we can indeed predict, especially the winners are most reliably predictable, and the losers not so much. But we can predict the winners best actually from these things. And as a side note, it is especially intonation that determines about whether or not people get to the first place. It is speaking rate, tempo, and pausing that determines whether or not people get to the 5th place or not. So there's even a bit of a differentiation between prosodic cues. What we did here in Denmark is, because we are collaborating with the business department, what we did is we looked into Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg's speeches, but with a specific application. I will get to that in a second. But there are bloggers and there are also journalists that seem to agree that public speaking wise, Mark Zuckerberg is, let's say, okay-ish, versus Steve Jobs, who is supposed to be a very great presenter, or he actually was a very great presenter. And we have low pass filtered parts of their speeches, and we gave them to listeners, to basically student listeners. So all they basically heard was the low pass filtered signal that sounded a bit like right. So you can hear intonation, you can hear, or you can estimate the tempo from the intonation and from the pitch and from the intensity curve. You can hear pausing, pause durations, but you cannot hear who speaks and what this person says. And then we asked for the leader experience, for the charisma, for passion, persuasiveness, charm, and things. And Steve Jobs are the gray bars, and Mark Zuckerberg are the light blue bars. And as you can see, the US bloggers and journalists agree with Danish listeners in that Steve Jobs somehow is better perceived than Mark Zuckerberg. And then we wanted to look into what actually drives these things. And the way we did it, or basically one way we did it, is we put their speech into text-to-speech synthesis. So we have looked into also manipulated, or we have analyzed what they did in terms of pitch range, pitch level, pause duration, and things. And then we have put these kind of mean values of their speech prosodic behavior into the same text-to-speech synthesis. So it was basically the same voice, it was the same utterances, but they had the speech prosody of either Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg. Because Danish people are quite fond of robots. We have them everywhere. We have them in banks, in hospitals, at schools even, because they have a very high frustration threshold. So it's not easy to make a robot frustrated. For example, in second language acquisition scenarios, they're going to repeat it every time to you, and they are training you unless you're actually getting it right. So this is the way Danish people use, for example, robots at schools. And one of the scenarios that we have used is we have put this so-called big carobot. The carobot drives through hospitals, takes medications from people's beds, and also takes the trash away, and also measures blood pressure of patients. And we put this one into the foyer of our university, where it has approached people over a full week and asked them, for example, something like, "Hello, I hope you are doing fine. If you wish, I can measure your blood pressure." And if people said, "Yes, okay, I want to have that," then the robot approached the person, unfolded the arm. People put the finger onto a sensor. Then it took a little while. And then the robot said, "Thank you, that's it already." And then people took away the finger, the robotic arm folded back, and the robot went again into the original position. And during this entire time, and this is now the tricky part of it, during this entire time, the robot gave advice on a healthier lifestyle. And so, for example, that you should not take the elevator, but rather take the stairs, that you should also look out of the window, not just on the screen, that you should eat more fruit and less unhealthy chocolate and sweets and stuff. And after the experiment, participants were asked to take a little reward from a bowl that was to the same volume filled that you see down here with either chocolate or fruit. And now the interesting thing is now that if this kind of lifestyle advice or basically well-being advice is given with Steve Jobs' tone of voice, all else being constant, we see over this full week an increase of chocolate over fruit consumption by 11%. So there's a significant increase. So people basically changed their behavior only based on the robot's tone of voice. So with prosody, we can make a change not just from human to human, but also from machine to human. And we took this one step further, and we wanted to know if we can make this even with if we can make people act against the better knowledge, basically. And the test that we did is we asked people to make a test drive through the city of Sonderborg that you see here on the little map. And we asked them to make a test drive from the little harbor down here, the Sonderborg Marina, to the campus of the university, SDU, which is up here. So it's a road of about 3.4 kilometers. And all of them were basically local students. So basically all of them know which was the correct way. And the pretext was that that engineers have they've invented a new car navigation system that can also be put into the older cars that have no own LCD. So as you can see here in this middle picture, there's no screen. So the idea was that they can only use voice commands to find their way. And they were to make a test drive. But in reality, it was just a mock-up system. So there was one person pressing a button whenever there was the right voice prompt to appear on the way. And what they did and did also not know is that the navigation system started to give the wrong instructions after about half of the course. So at about 1.7 kilometers, the system started to give the wrong instructions, and it got worse and worse and worse in 4 levels. So in level 1, there are still a lot of ways back to the university. At level 2, you have only 2 main roads, and it was a huge detour. And at level 3, this year after the bridge, this year is the only way back to the university. At level 4, you cannot get there. Otherwise, you have to turn around and get back. And half of the participants use Steve Jobs' tone of voice with the navigation system, and the other half use Mark Zuckerberg's tone of voice. And we were interested in, when do participants stop this test drive?
Hallo, ich bin Ihr neues nachrüstbares Navigationssystem. Sie können mich einfach nachträglich in jedes alte Autoradio installieren.
Yeah, this was the Steve Jobs tone of voice, and here's the Mark Zuckerberg. Upsala, wait a second.
Hallo, ich bin Ihr neues nachrüstbares Navigationssystem. Sie können mich einfach nachträglich in jedes alte Autoradio installieren, ganz ohne Kabel, extra Bildschirm und großen Aufwand. Großartig, nicht wahr? Heute bringe ich Sie vom Yachthafen in Sonder. Heute bringe ich...
Bla, bla, bla. Okay,
hallo.
Stop it. Okay, so, and the thing is that 26.7% did not stop the test drive when we had Steve Jobs' tone of voice built into the car navigation system. So basically, we had to call them on the smartphone and get them back home. And when there was the Mark Zuckerberg condition, basically 20% stopped at one of the very first wrong commands already. And stopping can also mean that they basically took their own way and have just ignored the car navigation system. And when we look into, after they came back, we asked them on a little questionnaire what they did. And the interesting pattern is that for the Steve Jobs case, the kind of SJ here, most people thought that this was an intended detour. So maybe there was a traffic jam, or there was a road blockage, or whatever. So they have basically trusted the system and did what they were told And in the case of Mark Zuckerberg, most of the people thought, ooh, badly programmed things, so I don't trust it. I better go my own way, or I stop and ask what I have to do. So again, with just prosodic changes, we can induce a change in people's behavior, even make them basically act against their better knowledge. So we have basically seen from these examples that actually prosody plays a big role. And I want to get a little bit deeper into this in the next little section of slides, because Danish people do crazy things. One of the things that they do, for instance, is that they put Christian believers into a magnetic resonance imaging system, so into an fMRI system, basically. And all they had to do is to listen to more charismatic, to more or less charismatic preachers preaching, both male and female, by the way, because we are here all Protestant, and then females can also be, of course, priests here. So the point is that they wanted to know what happens in these people's brains when they are just listening to these different persons. And of course, if you have the same text, if you are just lying in this fMRI scanner, all you have are people's voices or are people's performances of delivery. This is how they are calling it here. And interestingly, what they found is that for the most charismatically rated preachers, and what they see is that people's lights go off in the brain, to say it very, very bluntly. So in a way that there's a decrease of activity in some areas of the prefrontal and dorsolateral cortex that are associated with cognitive control of behavior and abstract reasoning. If you want to put it very simply, you could say that people have perceived these most charismatic speakers less critically. So they are not so much reflecting about what they say. They are much more easily saying, yeah, okay, yeah, it sounds nice. I'm all in. I'm going to buy that. So this is the kind of effect, and this has already now been replicated also with business, with economic students. I'm listening to CEOs giving keynote speeches. So you can get the same effect. People's brain activity is decreasing, which makes sense because it is just like here. It is an effect of trust. So if you are a charismatic person, people are they are basically committed. They want to follow your ideas, your thoughts, and they are not questioning so much what you are saying. And this is the same effect that we see here in the fMRI study. And as for the time course of things, there's an interesting study from 2019 where Caspi and colleagues from, I think this is Tel Aviv University, where they have cross-combined strong and weak delivery. So a very boring and, let's say, well, the delivery in this case means both gesture and voice. So they have had people talking in a very flat and monotonous way without using any gestures and explaining things. And then there was the strong delivery where people had a lot of variation in tone and loudness and pause duration and tempo, and also used more gestures. And they have combined both of these conditions with spectacular, visionary, groundbreaking content and most boring, trivial stuff ever. And they have asked the listeners, how charismatic is that? And they did this with a so-called perception analyzer that you can see up here. So basically, people have used a little box with a little turning knob, and every 15 seconds they have turned the knob into a certain position. And this is how they got these curves over time. And what you can see in these curves is that they are separating after about 30 seconds, and they never and they never cross each other again, even if it's up to 15 minutes. They come a little closer, especially they are separating here, but they are not crossing completely each other again. And the ones that go a little up in perceived charisma are both those with the strong delivery in the first 7 minutes, independently of whether you have something important to say or the most trivial stuff ever. So it doesn't matter for the perceived charisma ratings of people. Only after about 7 minutes, there's a significant difference coming up. So there's an interaction between delivery and content, but not before that. But by and large, if you're not talking for too long, what you say definitely does not matter as much as how you say things. And this is another nice example of this whole rule. And I think what underlines this kind of things most strongly is machine learning, because there is no way to bias a machine in a way. So it only gets input and it makes statistical predictions on it. And there are a number of studies out there where they have compared, for example, acoustic and linguistic features, and have also mapped these things onto certain outcomes. This one here is about cosmetics, and basically persuading clients to buy certain cosmetic products. And they have recorded all of these kind of customer-client discussions, and they have analyzed them into prosodic features and into verbal linguistic features. And down here, the A stands for acoustics, so basically prosody, and the L stands for linguistics, so basically the words. And they have predicted, and what you see here is basically the accuracy of the prediction, whether or not the client buys the product in the end. This is basically what you see down here. And the interesting thing is that it is not just the consultant's words and prosody that predicts the outcome, but also the client's words and prosody that predicts the outcome. And in both cases, the acoustics, and this means the prosody, is a much stronger prediction than the linguistic level of the machine learning things. And there are studies that show things like these a lot more. We have Petkova et al. 2017 on the persuasiveness of the rating predictions of people. You can see that the prosody outperforms the hand gestures. In this case, we have Chen et al. 2014 on public speaker assessment predictions. Again, speech outperforms both the visual and the lexical information. And we have Brillman and Scherer 2015 about how to sway votes in the political election. And again, it is the audio that has the strongest prediction of outcome. So we can say that indeed acoustics, and very often this basically means prosody, actually matters very, very much when we are talking about this. And saying that, it is very interesting that we basically know so much from the whole research that the voice matters a lot about how you are perceived. But when we are looking into how people are trained, so how the rhetorical trainers try to improve your performance, they either work mostly on the words and on the gestures, basically leaving out the voice, or they are practicing the voice in a way that we have done 2,000 years ago, or basically for the last 2,000 years, which is not bad because it has in some way worked, but it's not really state of the art. This was where basically we started in 2015 developing this kind of acoustic voice profiling, which is, given my own phonetic training, of course, in a way prosodically oriented. So I wanted to do what I feel good with. And at the same time, it seems that this is something that was also one of the most important ingredients of a charismatic delivery. And here's the SDU. It basically all started about 8 weeks after I came there. And people have asked me, hey, Ollie, you can do speech, right? So can't you teach our engineers to give better presentations because they are sounding so boring? And they have to make money with the ideas. And they indeed, there was this situation that in investor pitch contests, our Danish students had a quite big failure chance. So at least they were actually quite well challenged by other people presenting. And when you're the new guy, then you're saying, yes, of course I can do that, right? So I had basically 12 weeks to prepare a 5 ECTS course on public speaking for engineers. And I found out quite quickly that I have basically promised too much because from the existing literature, it was very hard to make such a course. So what I did is I bought myself a couple of books on public speaking on Amazon. And if you try that, you can see that there are thousands of books on that topic, well, perhaps hundreds of books on that topic. And they all say, yes, the voice is very important. And then the chapter on the voice is often quite thin. And you find things in there like you have to speak fluently, you have to have a very give a rhythm and intonation, you've got a clear and strong voice, ideally, and also perhaps something like a vivid tone of voice, and sometimes also a warm tone of voice, whatever that means, right? I mean, I didn't know what it means. And we've tried it with our engineers. We have basically asked them, now all please use a clearer and stronger voice. And they all did different things. So some talk louder, some talk higher pitched, some talk faster. So responses to instructions like these are far from being homogeneous. And this was also one more reason why we thought, we have to basically do something about that. And it's getting even a little worse because people contradict each other. If you happen to buy the book of Mrs. Volkmann, then you are going to read that pauses should be long because long pauses have a structuring function. She recommends breathing through the mouth because this is especially in online settings less noisy, which is, I think, quite obvious. You should not try to change your pitch level, is what she says, and she says fluent speech is good. And then you buy the book of Fox Cobain, and she tells you pauses should be short because shorter pauses make you sound more fluent. And then she says breathing through the nose is better because this actually supports belly breathing. And she says try hard to change your voice pitch level and make it lower. And speaking slower is what she recommends. And then you buy the next book of Kurt Mortensen, and he tells you both short and long pauses are good. Perhaps when you are changing the slide, make a bit of a longer pause, but within a slide, make shorter pauses. And he also says, yes, changing the voice pitch level is good, but he recommends to speak higher pitch and not lower pitch. And he says occasionally these fluencies are good and faster speaking is what you should do. And my most favorite page is the second last page where he says, if you don't like how you sound, take a deep breath and find a solution. Where I think, okay, you have basically spent now about 20 euro for a person that tells you if it doesn't work, well, at some point it might. So this was the situation that I was at when I have accepted to make a 5 ECTS course about public speaking for Danish engineers. And there was a very strong motivation due to that to develop something on our own. And of course, it was not done within about 3 months. It took almost 2 years. But what we came up with is the so-called PIXAR algorithm, or the acoustic voice profiling. PIXAR stands for Perception Integrated Charismatic Speech Analysis. If you are in business, things need names. This is one of the things that you are learning quite quickly. You need to put fancy names on everything that you do. But basically what we did is we have asked all over the world, so not just in the US, who do you think are good speakers or bad speakers? Who do you like to listen to? Who do you like to not listen to so much? And then we have looked into the acoustic overlaps between what people say are good speakers and bad speakers. And this in combination with existing literature on charismatic speech by for example, Julia Hirschberg, Tuati, and Rosenberg, and Signorello, and other phoneticians, we have come up with the parameters that we might want to manipulate in a laboratory setting. And this was the last step, that we went into the speech lab. We have used solar manipulation, but also other ways of manipulating things. And we have made very traditional stepwise stimulus continua, and then always ask for people's charisma, for people's persuasion, charm, and etc. And we have collected within 2 years over 500,000 listener ratings on these different things. And the result was that we have now a system where you can put in 40 seconds of your speech or more. It can also be 40 minutes, it doesn't matter, but at least 40 seconds. And we are breaking this performance up into, actually, this is not updated, it is now 21 acoustic parameters already. And we can give you a score for your own peer group, which might, for example, be German natives or female native speakers of German, or the male native speakers of German, or whatever. And then we can give you a score about how well you perform within your peer group. The score is just for you, because people like getting scores. So it's just the playful think of it. For us, actually, the relevant thing is in the middle here, because we can tell you for each individual parameter where you are good at already and where you need more training, because basically no one is bad in all things. It's very often that people have 1/3 or more 2/3 already quite well, and 1/3 where they need more support. And this is basically what I will also do with you in lecture 3, where I come to Ghent, and we will use the system, we will train ourselves. I have hopefully my whole VR glasses and stuff with me, so that we can also have fancy feedback things and see how you can playfully become better speakers. So just as a little question, what do you think actually makes a good voice? Any idea? No one has an idea.
Please, if you want to say something, just turn on your mic and
yes,
say
it's helpful indeed.
Don't be shy.
There's one in the chat, I think.
Yeah, let's see.
Contrast. Yes, contrast is this is indeed true. And this is actually a very good comment, because this is one of the things that we cannot do so well still in our system, because we are basically measuring settings, let's say holistic prosodic settings. What we cannot cover for the moment, at least, is being how to be repetitive, because, for example, especially when you're doing something like red speech, people, at least in German, very often do this kind of head patterns. Na 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 na, which actually give you a quite good pitch range, and also the pausing and stuff can be nice. But if you always do the same thing, it doesn't really add to your charismatic effect. But the point is that we cannot really measure this, at least for now, so well. In this respect, contrast is indeed, the skill to not be too repetitive in what you are doing is indeed very, very important. Yes, that's right. What I wanted to get at is that indeed but it took us 5 years to find that out. And I don't want to do any public speaker training bashing here, because indeed what all of these people say is correct. So for their own gender or sex, for their own vita, for their own background, they are all correct. The problem is that you cannot generalize from your own speaker sex and background onto all other people. So if you are breaking these kind of recommendations down into the people's individual vita, then all they say is actually correct, but not for everyone. So this is what I want to get at. For example, we see that for the male speakers, indeed, a bit of a higher pitch level makes sense. For the females, maybe the same, but certainly not too much higher. So ideally, I'm a little lower. And the same for the speaking rate. For the male speakers, yes, a little faster is okay. Not too fast. If you are hitting 5.5 syllables per second or even faster, then it's not good anymore. It depends a bit on the pause duration, but in general, but as a female speaker, you actually should not talk too fast. So there are also gender differences or speaker sex differences that we have to cope with here. This was one of the things, one of the backgrounds of the question. Okay, we have 10 minutes left. Let me just say a few things about what we do and what the kind of surprising power of our scoring system is. Because we have in Denmark, all our engineers get also soft skill training. So from the semester 1, they're also learning management skills and leadership skills, and they also learn presentation skills. And we are teaching these kind of presentation skills, so we get people's charisma scores from the first semester onwards. And we also have a lot of oral exams in Denmark, also in the first semester. And we just did, for the fun of it, basically, we just looked into how well do the students' charisma scores predict the oral exam grades, both in groups and individually. And as you can see, they actually do significantly. And even more so, it's slightly stronger. So for the groups than for the individuals. So the groups are on the right-hand side and the individuals on the left-hand side. In both cases, there is a strong positive correlation. Of course, this does not mean necessarily, at least, that the lecturers are so much blown away by good people that they are giving better grades. It can also mean that, for instance, students are much more well organized, that they have a stronger commitment, and therefore also give better presentations, right? So it can also be that way. It doesn't say anything about the direct causality here. But we also do something like creativity task or team challenges, like the marshmallow thing. Marshmallow challenge means that you get spaghetti, sticky tape, a band and a marshmallow, and you have 18 minutes to build a tower just by connecting these things, and the marshmallow must be put on top, and it must stand for 60 seconds without dropping. And if this is achieved, then we are going to measure the height of this tower. Okay, and also there, if you're looking into people's the group's charisma, the group's mean charisma scores, and the height of the tower, we can see that the more charismatic people in a group reach the more successful team result. Anyway, so the tower is less often 0, so it less often collapses, and we get, this was actually the highest tower here, 140 centimeters that people built within 18 minutes. So there are things that we can do with the score that are useful. Like here we have, this is brand new. If you take the German stock index, the companies of the German stock index, and you take the company's dividend distribution, so how much money they gave out to their shareholders of the year, and you take the annual keynote speech of the CEO of the company, we also get a significant correlation between our scores and the dividend of these company distributions, for instance. And we just did the same also for the US, and we also get out a significant score there, but a negative one. But we haven't really figured out why. But it is significant in the US, but just in the opposite direction. But again, we are obviously predicting something that has a tangible value in reality, but of course the actual explanation needs to be defined. And they're doing in the company now is that we are developing hardware. We have developed, just in the case you're also interested in it, a little sensor vest that has 12 different channels at both at the wrist and at the lower, at the upper arm, and also at the shoulders. So we are basically measuring body motions and body positions. We have a breathing belt integrated. Oops, here we've got a heart rate sensor integrated, and we are also measuring body temperature here and on the back, and also people's humidity level on the back. So if people start sweating, we can see it, and if people get stressed, we can also see it in the body temperature. And all of these signals are basically time aligned, recorded with your speech signal. And this little cap measures your jaw movement, your jaw lowering in stereo, because a lot of people talk without actually getting their teeth out. So they're basically keeping their teeth together the entire time. And of course, you can talk in that way, but it just doesn't sound so nice. And it actually is much related to people's perceived competence scores. So we use this one as a feedback device because people always say, no, I don't do that. And then it's nice to have a device that tells them, yes, you do. And please open the jaw more when you are, for example, stressing words. The last thing is the sensor system, where we look into people's movements of their foot. So if they're standing balanced or if they're moving around the entire time, these are all things that we now correlate with people's prosody, and hopefully get in the next years a lot of insights about how we can train and how we can also, but basically the entire thing is correlated with. I stop here, but we can also measure body size. This is very nice. So if you're sounding taller or smaller, and I will come to you with all of these apps, hopefully then by the end of April. Thanks a lot. I will stop here.
Thank you so much. It was
just 2 minutes,
very interesting, and you're definitely charismatic.
I'm a